Are you fed up of spending 3+ hours marking books, writing the same comments on repeat? Well, today I will share such a simple and easy marking strategy to overcome this, so no longer will you drown in that book and homework marking. Plus, I'll be giving you the template for free.
Hey there teachers, welcome to Miss Estruch Teach and Tell, the podcast where every week I dive into all the tips and tricks that make teaching life so much easier. Whether you're a veteran educator, an early career teacher learning the ropes, or balancing the classroom with being a busy parent, this will help you streamline your workload and bring a bit more balance to your life. You bring the coffee and I'll bring the teach and tell.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Miss Estruch Teach and Tell, the podcast designed to help busy, overwhelmed teachers streamline their workload and reclaim their evenings. I'm your host, Miss Estruch, or Katie, and each week I share practical strategies to save you time and help you focus on what truly matters, teaching effectively while maintaining your sanity. Okay, quick coffee catch-up time. How has your week been? For me, I've been in big picture planning mode because although I'm now working online in terms of I'm an online teacher, I've got my own business, it's still the same like you will experience. That exam season, which is May, June, is probably the busiest time because it's the highest pressure with things to do with marking, getting students ready, and it's definitely my busiest season. So I have, although it's only January, February time, taken the time now to plan February, March, April, May, and June to look at everything that I want to do each month, whether I can physically fit it all in, how all of those different aspects are going to support students when it finally comes to June. So basically I've been doing some big picture planning, re-looking over my original plan that I had for the year, which I created back in November. So if you haven't done a workload review recently, I highly recommend it. I suppose if you're teaching in schools, it might be more looking at things like when are you going to finish the SPAG, when are you going to do your next end of unit test, when are you going to do your mocks, which you may well have that planned already, because I know for my school we used to plan that back in September, but you might be reassessing whether it's all going to fit in according to when you thought. Okay, let's move on to the main content, which is this marking strategy to streamline your workload, and that is using whole class feedback instead of traditional marking. So let's talk about marking. I would say it's probably the number one thing that most students say if they could remove it from their job, it would be the marking. It's usually every teacher's nightmare, and it's because it's repetitive and time consuming. Those are normally the reasons, and sometimes as well it might be, depending on what your marking policy is at your school, you might feel that you're being asked to mark in a particular way that you don't necessarily think is having a massive impact on your students' progress, which then if it's going to take you hours to do, it's going to be incredibly frustrating. So if you are spending hours currently marking all individual books, and when I say this, I mean handwriting individual comments on every single book, writing the same comments, typically you might have the same 5 things that keep coming up over and over for one particular piece of work, then this is going to save you so much time. And I would argue it's even more effective than you writing directly into the student's book. So whole class feedback for me was an absolute game changer. You might have used it before already, and if you have, amazing. I'm going to share how I've used it. It might be the same as you, it might be different. And if you haven't used it before, I really hope this is about to revolutionize the way you mark and save you so much time. So what is whole class feedback? Basically, it's a structured way to provide targeted feedback. It is still personalized to the students, but without you having to write that target and that feedback repeatedly on every single book or on every single piece of homework. So basically, instead of repeating yourself, you create a key, and that is going to correspond to particular targets, and you can present this as a whole class feedback sheet. So let me go through how it works, and I'm going to link this to the freebie that I have linked to this particular episode, so you can download it from the show notes completely for free. It's a PowerPoint that I've created that goes through how to use whole class feedback, and the template at the end. So the very last slide is the template that I use. It shows you where to type and edit for each time you use it. So first of all then, we've just got how do you use it? How does it work? What you would need to do is you still need to look at every student's piece of work, but instead of writing the same thing over and over, so maybe there's the same spelling mistake that people keep misspelling. It might be a particular scientific word that is commonly misspelt. Or maybe it's the same error. They keep misreading the question. Maybe lots of people did an explain answer instead of describe. Have a scan through, and what I typically do is, as I'm marking the first 5, I then have a piece of paper where I write down as I go, what would the feedback be that I'd write on those, and I'd start writing target 1, target 2, or T1, T2, T3. And what I tend to find, by the time I've marked 5, I've pretty much got my list of what are the common things that keep coming up. And from then on, all I need to do is have a look at my list. If someone has done the describe rather than explain, that was my T2. Now when I'm reading through their work, instead of writing the feedback, I just write T2. So it saves so much time. You still have to put markings on their work. You're still reading their work because that's what you need to do to assess it. But instead of writing the same thing over and over, you're saving so much time. You wrote it down once at the start, and now you're just writing a letter and a number code. So that's what I would do. Go through all of them, make down those notes, write down those targets, and then all of the students' work is covered in those different targets. I would say though, try and pick what are the main 3 you want them to focus on, because if they've suddenly got a page where they've got 5 to 10 different things, that's so overwhelming and probably a bit disheartening. So just pick what are the 3 main ones I'd say in particular. Once I've then gone through all of them, what I'm able to do pretty quickly is, from reading it, just assess what was the common theme that most students did well, what were the most common mistakes people were making, were there any particular spelling mistakes that were frequently seen, and overall, what was 1 or 2 things that would have been better, like most students could have done to push themselves to the next grade. And that's where I then go to the template sheet, which if you're watching on YouTube, you can see the template sheet now. From reading through it and from the targets I've written, I can now think, if I do this straight away after reviewing it, it shouldn't take you that long to mark a whole class's homework or set of books if you're just doing those lettered codes. I can then type in this box, overall, what did they do particularly well? So I've used this before. I think it was like for like heart work, and they had to label the heart and annotate certain things and answer questions. And I found that most of them, they were really good at accurately labeling the heart and accurately drawing in the arrows to show the direction of blood flow. So that's what I'd put in the what went well. Common mistakes. So maybe I'd then put a common mistake, which for the heart, it might be students maybe were saying the ventricles are thicker rather than saying muscles in the ventricle walls are thicker. So I'm just pointing out the common mistake is clarity of answer, and I could talk through that. Any misconceptions that they might have, you can put in that box. And then all of the target codes that you came up with, the T1, T2, and so on, you can type it here. And this is when I would invest the first 5 to 10 minutes of the lesson doing this. And this could actually be your starter for the lesson. You give back the work, the students look at the codes, and I say to them, have a look at the code that I've written down, and then they copy down the target into their book. And that then means that they're still getting the information, but they're writing it down lengthy instead of you. And I actually found that students often engaged with this more than if I had written it down, because they're looking at things thinking, well, I don't know what that means. So they're actually having to read and listen to me say, well, this is what I meant by that. So they're actually taking it on board more than if I actually wrote it down. I've also got space here, as I said, if there are any common spelling mistakes or grammatical errors. Presentation may or may not be relevant. So that is in terms of not like a stand-up talking presentation. It's maybe the presentation of your work. It could be the way that you were presenting your tables, or if there was a particular way you wanted them to present it, you could comment on what was particularly good or how they could improve it there. Then we've got the target box, and that's where you could say even better if. So what are some of the things students could do to push them up to the next grade? And then I've got that and finally. And in that and finally, I use that section for an overall summary. So it could be, well done for doing this piece of work. If you want to do further reading, I'd recommend this. Or I might acknowledge anyone who put exceptional effort in. So I might say, and finally, these 3 students, wow, the effort you put in really shone, or I could see you made improvements. So anything that doesn't really fit into any of those boxes, but you want to give as a final conclusion, goes in that box there. So why this works then? I found this saved me hours of marking. And not only did it save time, it saved my sanity. I wasn't getting really frustrated writing the same things over and over. Instead, I could just write the letter T and a number. I found it was more meaningful feedback as well. As I said, the students I found engage with that feedback that I'm sharing with them, the verbal feedback, instead of just jumping straight to, well, what mark did I get, or just looking for how many ticks. So I found it was more meaningful feedback. I also found it improved retention. So that verbal feedback that I was giving combined with the students having to write down the target themselves made them retain it better and more likely to focus on doing it. And as well, I found it helpful for planning future lessons because I would then save that PowerPoint feedback sheet in the lesson that I used. So then when it came to the next year, before I teach that lesson, I have a look at what did I write down as the common misconceptions and the even better ifs, and I try and tweak the lesson. So the next time I teach it, I really emphasize the misconceptions in hope that then when I mark it the next year, those misconceptions, fewer of them had them. So there's so many ways that this is such a useful tool. And if this is something that your school isn't already using and you feel you've got quite a restrictive marking and feedback policy, I would really recommend that you trial it and then take it to your line manager, head of department, and just say, look, I've heard about whole class feedback. I did trial it and this is what I found. And I really think it would benefit our students as well as the staff's time. And therefore they're spending less time marking, but it's still as meaningful, and then have more time to spend on creating resources or whatever it might be to better support the students. So this week's quick win of the week links back to pretty much what I just said then. I strongly recommend that you pick one piece of homework or set of books to trial this whole class feedback with. And as I said, you've got the free template that you can download from the show notes. It comes with instructions. It comes with the template that you can project up at the end. Have a go and just see how much time it saves you, and also how much more the students are actively engaging in that feedback. So the resource roundup, as I've mentioned lots of times this episode, is that whole class feedback PowerPoint, which contains the template. Click the link in the show notes or the YouTube description, download that, and please try it out. It's completely editable, so if you don't like the way that I've presented it, change the way it's presented, change the title of the boxes, do whatever works for you. But the main thing is give it a go and see how much time you can claim back. So that is it for today's episode of Miss Estruch Teach and Tell. I hope you found it helpful. Make sure that you subscribe so you don't miss out on any of these practical tips and freebies that I give you. And if you have found it helpful, it would be really, really helpful for me if you could leave a comment or a review or share with a teacher friend so that this podcast can reach even more teachers to help them as well. But that is it for this week. I'll see you next time. You bring the coffee and I'll bring the teach and tell.